Longevity is such a popular topic these days, and people are trying all sorts of things to enhance their lifespan, whether it's fasting and intermittent fasting, or even taking drugs like metformin or rapamycin. But although these may have effects on certain key parts of longevity, a lot of people are missing out on the key thing that can influence all aspects of health span and lifespan, simply just exercise. So today we're going to look at a recent paper that looks at the many benefits of exercise for enhancing lifespan and also health span. Let's go. What's up, guys? My name is Richard, and this is my channel, Evolved Health, where my aim is to help you improve your health, performance, and longevity. And specifically today, we're going to be diving into exercise for enhancing that longevity component. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the like and subscribe, and make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on anything new. Really helps out the channel and helps the algorithm on YouTube. All right, let's dive into the content. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at this paper in Aging that was posted in May of 2021. It's the effects of exercise on cellular and tissue aging. And before we dive into this paper, it's important that you know, if you don't already know, all the hallmarks of aging, because they're going to cover a lot of these throughout this paper. So this is a great paper that outlines all the key hallmarks. We're not going to go through everything in detail here, but what we want to see are these are the main ones. So we've got things like genomic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, loss of proteostasis, deregulated nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, and altered intercellular communication. So just looking at this alone, we know that longevity and lifespan is a really complex combination of things throughout the body. It's not so easy as addressing one simple thing. And this is where a lot of the approaches like taking drugs or certain nutraceuticals, they might address one area, but they're not necessarily addressing all of them. And we can look to lifestyle and environmental aspects that can influence a lot more of these, specifically when we look at this paper here. So we'll keep those hallmarks in mind. Again, we're not going to dive into all of them. I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about each of these. Maybe in a future video, we can look at each of those in more detail. But right off the bat, we know they state right here, exercise is a lifestyle intervention with known anti-aging effects capable of counteracting several of the hallmarks of aging, including senescence and age-associated inflammation. So those are two of the big ones, cellular senescence, where the cells aren't functioning like they should, and the aspect of inflammation or inflammaging. So we know that exercise helps improve those. And in fact, even things like metformin that are exercise mimetics or exercise and fasting mimetics, right? They seem to activate AMPK. A lot of those can just be done through exercise. So you don't always need these fancy drugs, which, metformin we know has some side effects now and may affect key areas of mitochondrial function and other areas. So keep that in mind. We've always got the low-hanging fruit with the simple things we can do. So let's look at exercise overall. They break down things into the primary aging modifiers and the secondary. So primary is going to be the things that we can't really affect. So those are just, unfortunately, due to the nature of our bodies and our biology, things that are going to break down over time, arguable. Maybe we can improve them eventually, but for now, there's certain things that are just tied into chronological aging. And then we have secondary aging. So those are things that are going to be influenced by lifestyle or the environment. So they kind of broach them by addressing those two things. First thing we come across, that exercise we know has a benefit. There's the minimum guidelines of 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity aerobic activity with some resistance and strength training in there. In my opinion and a lot of other professionals' opinion, that's nowhere near enough to really have true health benefits, at least when we're talking about lifespan, and they even state that clearly here. So it has been estimated that performing 3 to 5 times the recommended physical activity reaches the maximal health span benefit that can be achieved with endurance exercise. Strength training should also be added to minimize loss of muscle mass that is characteristic of aging and disease. And we're going to talk about strength training specifically because, in my opinion and many other professionals' opinion, strength training and resistance training is probably one of the most important things when we're talking about longevity and maintaining muscle mass, because it's such an important player. So often, if we can get a bit more in, you're going to see more benefit. Of course, there are diminishing returns. That doesn't mean go run a marathon every week, but still do it smart. But you should be trying to get in as much exercise as you can for most people these days. It's a couple hours, easily. All right, so moving down, we can see the sort of summary of the main outcomes that they outline just down in this table. The nice thing is when we compare exercise to other things such as caloric restriction or, as I mentioned, pharmaceuticals, that we have a lack of adverse outcomes that's typically observed with other things such as, again, time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting. There are negative effects. We can get downregulation in metabolism, downregulation in hormones. You can lose muscle mass, and that's a big one. A lot of people in the longevity space are really pushing fasting, but if you weigh up the benefit of fasting with a loss of muscle mass, I think it's a net negative. You're often better not fasting and maintaining muscle mass and getting enough protein and maintaining that over age versus becoming frail, risking a fall, losing muscle mass, breaking bones. That's going to be a higher risk of mortality. So personally, in my opinion, I tend to think I'd rather maintain my muscle mass through good nutrition and through strength training. But we can see here we've got many benefits of exercise. So it's across the board. We see cognitive benefits, reduced inflammation, we get more progenitor cells, so stem cells, cardiovascular health, metabolic health, bone health, muscle. Even for the liver, we increase gluconeogenesis, so good for diabetes and prevention of diabetes. So there's a whole host of benefits here of attaining that exercise aspect compared to just, say, taking some type of supplement or drug. If you want, you can look through this table. We're not going to go through all of these in detail, but we can see, again, just summarizing, we got the benefits across all major body systems. And that's a huge benefit of exercise compared to other modalities. And why I would stress you have to get exercise in as a basic if you care about health and lifespan versus trying to take supplements, but you're not exercising. Right? You could take all the metformin in the world or rapamycin, but if you're not exercising, you're kind of missing the boat entirely here. So obviously we've got cardiorespiratory, cardiopulmonary benefits. Won't go into too much, that's pretty straightforward. More aerobic activity, we see improvements in the cardiovascular system. The one, as I mentioned, that's really important is this maintenance of muscle and bone, muscle specifically. So loss of muscle mass is characteristic of aging and starts to decline after only 25 to 30 years of age, especially if we're not doing resistance training. That can be maintained with resistance training. And it's thought to contribute to a wide array of age-associated pathologies, such as frailty, weakness, loss of function, metabolic syndrome, cancer, and even neurodegenerative diseases. So again, a couple of things that I've mentioned there. So maintenance of muscle mass is so important when we're talking about aging. And this is where the people often in the longevity sort of space that are really trying to reduce the activation of mTOR as much as they can, I think you're missing the mark a little bit. We need to maintain some level of mTOR, and it's all about balance. So we need metabolic flexibility. We have periods of increasing muscle protein synthesis and mTOR, and periods of maybe low calorie or fasting, but we need that balance. And it's not going all the way across into the fasting space. And that even plays a role with protein. A lot of people say not to consume a high protein diet. I would argue the opposite. And obviously there's going to be a lot of benefits across the whole nervous system. We mentioned neurodegenerative disease. There's cognitive benefits with exercise. We get activation of BDNF. It helps improve growth factors in the brain. We get more neural development, helps maintain. We get reduction in inflammation and neuroinflammation. So a lot of benefits even on the cognitive side. I've mentioned the metabolism and glucose control. When we're exercising, we get an increase of that GLUT4 transporter, which helps shuttle glucose into the cell. So for people who have insulin resistance, you can now have a method of improving that just through exercise. And that's why it's so effective in metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. So let's review the important stuff. How exactly is exercise doing all these things, and how does it have all of these benefits? So we talked about the main hallmarks of aging. And this is the amazing thing with something so simple as exercise. We influence all of these hallmarks of aging. So we look at genomic instability. Exercise minimizes lesions that occur that cause genomic instability, partly through reduction in age-associated 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine, so 8-OHDG for short. You get increased activity of DNA repair. So when we do have those breaks, we can actually repair it. We get resistance to oxidative stress, and we get NF-kappa B and PGC1 alpha signaling. all those are going to help genomic instability. We get improvement in telomere and telomerase activity. So we're going to enhance and maintain our telomeres for longer. If you don't know what telomeres are, they're just the end caps on our genes and on our DNA, that when those eventually get fatigued and there's too many that have been removed, the cell tends to become senescent or turn off. So it's a negative aspect. So we want to maintain telomeres as much as we can. It's only one aspect of everything. We have epigenetic alterations. So physical activity, this is increasing now with the whole genome aspects and the genome-wide epigenetic studies, where we're seeing more and more effects of physical activity across many aspects of the epigenome. So 2 recent papers in the last couple of years, we know that there are a lot of epigenetic changes, hundreds to thousands of changes that occur in the body and in the epigenome just through physical activity. And we know that those are going to influence disease in a whole plethora of ways. So that's a big one. Again, we get microRNA, DNA methylation, histone modification. So there's various ways that exercise is influencing that. Then we get improvements affecting proteostasis. So proteostasis is negative. We want good turnover of proteins. When we don't have proteins turning over properly, they become tangled or misfolded, and then that leads to dysfunction across the body. So again, we talked about mTOR and that activation, that anabolic effect of enhancing protein synthesis, not just in the muscle, but in other areas. So when we get increased turnover, that's going to improve that whole aspect. Looking at a couple other things, one of the major aspects they're looking at is AMPK, so nutrient sensing. We're going to have a lot of benefits through physical activity and enhancing that. And again, some of it comes through activation of IGF-1 and specific pathways there. But a lot of it is going to be downstream mediators and effectors of AMPK. We can see just in this graphic. We're not going to go into all the details, but know that we're getting a lot of systemic effects, mostly through that AMPK pathway, which is a target for a lot of people in the longevity space, but they're usually trying to use drugs or nutraceuticals or other things. All we got to do is do some physical activity and do some hard stuff, and we can activate that easily. Then we've got improvements in mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are the ones that are producing energy in the cell. They're also important for cell signaling, production of reactive oxygen species. So we want to maintain really healthy mitochondria. A lot of people take all sorts of supplements to help enhance this, but exercise, again, is one of the best things. We know aerobic exercise helps with mitochondrial biogenesis, so we're getting activation of PGC1 alpha. Even some resistance training may help mediate some mitochondrial benefits. Again, improvement in that oxidative capacity and oxidative resilience. Even looking at then cellular senescence, so exercise enhances telomere length, which we covered. It reduces the expression of apoptosis regulators, so anything in the cell cycle system, such as P53, which is a tumor suppressing aspect. So the whole thing with cellular senescence, we can modulate just simply through physical activity. What about stem cells? I think everyone knows what stem cells are now. As we get older, we tend to exhaust them, or we can't activate our stem cells and progenitor cells as well. But exercise has been shown to be a potent stimuli for the migration of stem cell subsets from their home tissue to impaired ones for later regeneration. That's especially true for muscle. We know we get satellite cells in the muscle post-exercise that help enhance muscle growth, but that can even be hematopoietic stem cells. And we even get exercise activating pluripotent cell progenitors in several tissues. So that can be mesenchymal, so more soft tissue, organs, neural stem cells, again, enhancing neurotrophic growth factors plus those neural stem cells. We're going to get improvement in cognitive health and neural health over time. Then we have altered intercellular communication. So there's things like inflammation and inflammatory cascades. Exercise has many pathways where we can see this being modulated and regulated. And part of it is actually due to some positive inflammatory mediators. So things like interleukin 6 from muscle and post-exercise can be beneficial, but often in other scenarios it's not. So this is where it's hard to replicate what we can do with exercise in other ways because it's specific to that area of physical activity. So we get lots of mediation across there, and that's going to help improve many aspects of that signaling. So we can see it covers the gamut, right? We're hitting almost all the hallmarks of aging, and we're doing it just through physical activity. So that has to be a fundamental to everyone's health and longevity protocol and plan. They talk about a little bit here, as I mentioned, AMPK as sort of the main component, and they go through how the signaling of AMPK is modulating these various other areas, so PGC1 alpha, NRF2, FOXO3, P53. So in this paper, they're summarizing to say that that's sort of the main effector, but we know that there are many other effects throughout the body through physical activity. Again, even here, again, that mTOR. So having some mTOR activity is important. We need to maintain muscle mass. The more you lose muscle mass as you age, the more it's going to affect frailty, strength, but also muscle is an endocrine organ, and it helps with metabolism and it helps with a host of things. We even see a reduction in ages, and this was an interesting one. So ages can be associated with cardiovascular disease and a host of other diseases, so we can modulate that simply through physical activity. A lot of people talk about eating meat and protein and the increase in ages, but we see some amelioration and benefit with physical activity and in modulating that. So again, I think in the end, we want to maintain a diet that's going to help us in the long term, especially if we're adding in the physical activity. Obviously, there's a lot of benefits for type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. We're not going to go into that for this talk today. If you want to dive into it, you can look at more. But to summarize all of that, this nails it on the head right here. Exercise is an effective strategy to prevent aging and enhance longevity and health span, both on a clinical and a cellular level, due to its capacity to modulate all 9 hallmarks of aging, all 9. So if we're going to try to target something to address longevity, we've got to be doing physical activity and exercise. You've got to be challenging yourself. It's got to be moderate physical activity at least. Throwing in some high intensity, more strenuous exercise is going to be beneficial on top of that, and maintaining the resistance training. So that's a key part. And this is just the schematic showing, in their view, how the main effects are happening. So we've got that AMPK activation, addressing all the hallmarks, thereby giving us a benefit in our longevity. So overall, if you're not addressing exercise in your longevity program and you're taking a whole bunch of supplements and doing all of these things, you're missing the mark. We've got to be doing physical activity. My typical recommendation based on the literature and also for minimum effective dose is trying to get in 2 or 3 runs a week, a half hour, an hour, and then 2 to 3 resistance training sessions on top of that. And that's going to hit you pretty well of getting across all the benefits of physical activity. And make sure not to overdo it. So you can do too much. And there is a sort of dose-dependent response of increasing aerobic activity, but that doesn't mean marathons every week. So hopefully you get some good education from that one, and it doubles down on you benefiting from physical activity and exercise in your program. That's all I got for you today. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button if you like the content, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on anything new. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you next time.